Hey there, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Belonging Life podcast. Excited to have you here today. I am actually back with Scot Loyd. Super excited about having an opportunity to share with him. If you saw the first of our videos, we knew we had a little bit of technical difficulty in there, but we're back to just kind of stretch this out a little further and actually dive a little further into the Charlie Kirk conversation. I want you all to keep something in mind as you listen to what Scott has to say here today. Scott's going to have some more to say about this than I am. I'll chime in where I believe I have something to lend to it, but I want you to keep something in mind. This is a conversation that is really set up for people who are willing to listen, first and foremost. You have a heart to hear. You want to learn. You want to educate yourself. You want to be able to create space and have the emotional capacity, the spiritual capacity, the relational capacity to be able to hear something that maybe you see in a different way, or maybe you don't understand. But at the center of this, our goal is never to harm people. Our goal is to bring information and insight to people so that really critical and appropriate choices and decisions are made, and even appropriate conversations are made around this. So, with that being said, let's just say we know that it's been over a month ago since the Charlie Kirk assassination. None of us, not Scott, not myself, none of us in any way, shape, or form condone
Right.
violence of any kind. So I just want to make that clear before Scott and I dive into this, so that you don't go down this pathway. Oh, people are glad. No, 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 no one is happy about what took place with Charlie Kirk. None of us are happy about that. There's no place for it. It shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't happen, and we hope that it doesn't happen to anyone else, whether they're voicing their opinion about something that we agree with or we disagree with. None of that matters in terms of how we deal with the person's life, from his wife to his children. Of course, our heart goes out to them, but we are not interested in tearing down or denigrating Charlie Kirk or his life. With that being said, there's two sides to this. One of the sides is that there are some things that Charlie Kirk said that fall into a historical um, pattern of attitudes and demeanor in this country in particular that we're going to point to today. Um, and while on the flip side, there were things he spoke of regarding the gospel, following Jesus, the text. We cannot take one side of the story and not deal with the other side of the story. These are the things we have to talk about. Scott is the perfect person for this, to be quite honest with you, to be able to have a conversation at this level. I'm happy to facilitate these things, and the reason for them is because, again, for somebody like Scott who can articulate this, I think it'll be powerful. So, with that said, again, Scott, welcome back. Super excited to have you and have the opportunity to, again, have you share some of your thoughts and insights, and just continue to educate people and bring people to this place of understanding or insight, or at least new information that they hadn't had before, or maybe haven't considered, or would just simply want to ignore because they've stood on a side. That's the side that they know that they need to take in order to get along with people, whatever their group is, their ecosystem. But let's talk about where you are today, what you see, what kind of things are kind of more prominent that really maybe need to be put to the forefront, have conversation around.
Well, thank you, Demetrius, for having me back. First of all, I think this is an important conversation to have. I appreciate your setup to this conversation. Absolutely. No one reasonable should condone the kind of violence we saw perpetrated against Charlie Kirk. That kind of violence is not welcome, especially in a country that should pride itself on our ability to debate vigorously
Mm,
ideas with people with whom we disagree, but understand that at the end of the day, this is about a vigorous exchange of ideas, and it is not a prelude to perpetrating violence of any kind. So I certainly embrace the nonviolent attitude and philosophy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I know you do as well,
yes.
even though there are many areas where we disagree with others that may come from a different perspective or political persuasion. And
Hmm.
Charlie Kirk was one of those people.
Hmm.
And where I'd like to start the conversation today is with what Charlie Kirk was doing with Turning Point USA around the country, because I coached collegiate debate at a competitive level for over 2 decades. I was at different colleges and universities, uh, most recently Christian universities and colleges. And so I dealt with a lot of young people, a lot of young men who were like Charlie Kirk in their demeanor, their attitude, their personality. So, what debate does, it sort of gives an opportunity for people to vigorously disagree on particular issues and topics within a framework, within rules, within time settings. So the analogy that I often use is a sports analogy. The game of football is a contact sport, but you can't just go out on the field and start hitting people any which way you'd like.
Right.
There is a context, right? There are rules and regulations. If you tackle someone, if you hit someone, you have to hit them within the framework of the field. You can't hit them out of bounds,
Yes.
or that will give you a penalty. There are certain ways that you tackle other people, that you hit other people with the ball. And if you do it the wrong way, and if you're caught by the referees, then you will receive a penalty. So, in competitive debate, and there are various forms and formats of this particular activity, but debate goes all the way back to the Greeks, to Aristotle, to Plato. They would set up these schools of rhetoric for people, everyday people, to learn how to defend themselves if they were accused of a crime or they wanted to have some sort of political influence or persuasion. And we inherited that form in our democracy and our way of government. Um, you know, uh, the institution that I work for now, the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. Most famously, we all remember the Lincoln Douglas debates, where Abraham Lincoln, Stephen Douglas, they would literally stand on a platform and people would come out to hear them debate the issues of the day. And their debates could go on for upwards of 8 hours. Of course,
Wow.
back then, they had a lot less distractions and it was a form of entertainment. And so now, um, obviously, our debates are a lot shorter because our collective attention span is a lot shorter. But there are still rules and regulations that govern the way that we interact with one another. In the competitive format that I coached, you had one side that represented the affirmative of a particular issue, and one side that attempted to negate the particular issue or the argument. And it is obvious that Charlie Kirk was a student of this particular art form, and he was very good at it for various reasons. First of all, he is a naturally charismatic individual. There was something about the way that he carried himself, the way that he commanded an audience. He lived his life and the way that he said things with confidence, and that is very important. Passion in debate, but also you have to have the facts on your side. And when I talk competitive debate, I would tell my students that you have to do more than just make a claim. You have to do more than just make a statement. You have to
Right.
back that up
Right.
with evidence. And not only can you just throw random pieces of evidence out there, but there was the claim, there was the evidence, and then there was what we called the warrant. And that was what connected the evidence to the claim. And so Charlie Kirk was good at doing this to a certain extent um, in his debates with other debaters, where he would set up a scenario and there were time parameters, there were rules, and there was regulations. And I encourage everyone to go out there and define those particular debates. Now, what he did on college campuses, where he would just show up and he would always be at the front of the room or the front of the crowd, that was a little bit different, because if you watched his methodology and the way that he did things in those particular settings, those of us that have participated or coached at the collegiate debate level would look at that and say, well, that's not really debate, because it wasn't a fair exchange of ideas.
Hmm.
So Charlie Kirk would typically show up and he would make some outrageous claims without providing any kind of evidence. And then he would make the statement, or there would be a sign that said, "Prove me wrong."
Hmm.
Well, I want to push back against that premise, because in traditional historical debate, it wasn't about proving the other side wrong. It was less of a verbal altercation and more of a verbal dance, where each side would produce their claims and their evidence, and then the judges would make a determination as to whether or not a particular side was more persuasive or less persuasive. So
Okay.
what Charlie Kirk did a lot of times, especially in these big settings, what he would just show up and say something provocative, and there's nothing wrong with being provocative per se. I do a lot of that in my social media, just to get attention, right, to
Sure.
draw an audience in. But
Sure.
where the problem came, and this was in the immediate aftermath of his death, there was a lot of people that were discovering him for the first time. And so the algorithms of the internet, something that he was involved in, began
Yeah.
to push out to them things that they already believed to be true. So if
Hmm.
someone was a devout Christian and the algorithm had picked up on that, then after Charlie Kirk's death, you're going to see a lot of his talks, or a lot of his podcast, or a lot of his debates about Christianity. And there was going to be a lot of information there, a lot of what he was saying that would have resonated with what you already believe to be true.
Hmm.
But if you go deeper, right, and you look at some of these more provocative, outlandish statements, there was a lot of problematic content that came out of Charlie Kirk's death. Now, I'll say this one more time, right, that nothing, absolutely nothing justifies what happened to him. But the flip side of that is that after his death, we saw people from both sides of the aisles pushing out information that at first glance seemed sort of contradictory.
Hmm.
On the one hand, you had a young man who was devout by all accounts in his faith in Jesus Christ and was sincere in that. But on the other side of that, there was a lot of hateful rhetoric that came out of his mouth that was primarily directed at Black people,
Hmm.
Black women specifically, and people of color, immigrants in general. And so a lot of problematic things that he had to say. Again, it just doesn't justify his death or the
Right.
violence that was perpetrated against him. But it's very important for us to understand that if you're attempting to digest this information, then you need to look at his competitive debates and not just his provocative rallies, because there is a difference in style and there is a very profound difference in substance. I always taught my students that before you are allowed to disagree with someone, you must first articulate their position,
Mm,
their arguments to their satisfaction, and then, and only then, are you allowed to disagree with them. What Charlie did in his public settings was he would set up what we called a straw man fallacy,
hmm
where he would say, this is what the Democrats believe, or this is what the evil liberals believe. And it was a caricature of their argument, and at best, and a gross misrepresentation of the argument at worst. And there wasn't a whole lot of nuance. Debate, when it's done well, it draws out the nuances and it shows points where we agree. And usually, what a good debate does at the end of the debate, the audience is left with this sense of, hey, we're not that far apart. There's a
hmm
lot more we agree about than
hmm
what we disagree about. Charlie Kirk's methodology was about highlighting the disagreement and magnifying the imagined space between all of us. And he did that because it aggravated emotions, it got people riled up,
Right.
and we understand that emotion is the greatest motivator to act or to do something. And
Yes.
so people would click, people would buy, and people would show up. Why? Because emotion, raw emotion, stirs us up to act in ways that maybe we normally wouldn't do if we stopped and we thought about it. What debate does, if it's done right, is it magnifies and elevates reason or logic over emotion. And
Mm.
in a lot of these settings, Charlie Kirk was doing the exact opposite.
You know, uh, I love that. Elevates reason or logic above emotion. And I, you know, it's kind of in my lane. I deal with that with people. So I there are going to be people who watch this and say, well, let me just ask for myself, what lane do we put him in? We realize that based on your description, that this is not the historical debate process. Again, the whole straw man piece, the um, kind of the big opening statement, the challenge on top of his tent, prove me wrong, or on anything that he had. I certainly have opened up many a sermon in that way, to get somebody to say, oh, this is the hook to draw you into what we're going to continue to move forward with here through a deep thought or question or something that seemed contrary. What do we call what Charlie Kirk was doing? How do we define it? Well, what is it called?
Yeah. So in his public settings, and I'm talking about when he would go to college campuses and there was a large audience, mainly he was acting in the space and in the tradition of a political provocateur. Like he was somebody of that was making these particular claims, and again, it was to emotionally drive an audience to a particular point. So a lot of times when people would stand in line and would ask him questions, they were good questions. But remember, these are ordinary people, and a lot of times they were college students who did not have the experience, the life experience.
Yeah.
Charlie Kirk was young, but he was a little older
Right.
than these college students. And then also he was in front of the room, and there's this idea that if you're in front of the room by audiences, you are immediately given a status of a expert that maybe
Absolutely.
you didn't necessarily earn,
Yeah.
or your credentials don't back up. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure it's out there, but I don't know what Charlie Kirk's credentials were. What was his degrees in, if he had a college degree? How did he study, and what books did he read? What philosophy, schools of philosophy, did he follow? And that's sort of indicative of the time that we're living in. There is a discounting among many in our society of the role of experts and the importance of study and expertise when it comes to particular issues.
Yeah.
And it's comical sometimes to think about. No one reasonable would show up for a medical emergency, and talk to the custodian and say, what do you think about my issue?
Right.
Right? It's not that the
Right.
custodian isn't a smart individual and isn't a skilled person, but we know that the custodian doesn't have the expertise and the training to diagnose and to operate if needed on whatever is ailing me.
Yeah.
But how many times do we hear people in our society today say, I'm listening to this person because they're saying things that agree with me? Well, what's their expertise? What's their what are their credentials in? And they don't have any. And so it's very important, if someone makes a claim, to follow up with,
Yeah.
is this in your field? Have you spent time studying this? Can you demonstrate that you have studied this? And sometimes that means a degree. Sometimes it means that these are the authorities that I'm appealing
Hmm.
to back me up on this. This is the evidence that I'm sharing. And just in a lot of the clips and a lot of the things that I've seen from Charlie Kirk's material, he makes no such evidentiary claims. He just makes statements, and because of the force of his personality and because of the certitude and the confidence with which he makes these claims, a lot of people assume that he is right, or that he has evidence to back it up, and it fails that standard on its face.
And so I love that, Scott, because I think that even as we have this conversation in this way, and you all are getting an opportunity again. Scott is educated in this. Scott is the person who I would have to have this conversation to stretch it out further more than myself. I do not have Scott's background, his educational background, his experience background. I don't have any of that. And so all the stuff that Scott just told you wouldn't be necessarily in my lane of things going back into that history of debate, and he teaches debate. So he's familiar with this. What I would like for those of you who are listening today, and you've gotten this far because you're still able to hang it here, I would like for you to pay very close attention to again a couple of things that Scott did mention in here, and that is it's one thing to say something. It's another thing for you just to say that without any evidence, without any support, any educational support, any historical support to back up what it is you're saying, and people who've really gone through the process of vetting out the conversation to the point where it makes sense, right? It's coherent. It's coherent enough for somebody to really pay attention to it. So I would challenge you, no matter what you've heard, to make sure that you have legitimate insight and information on what you heard and the arguments that you hear. Because truthfully, Scott, one of the things that I struggled with the entire scenario was I wasn't sure what his purpose was. I'm just be totally honest with you. On as a Christian, on one hand, I would be like, yeah, great. You're going, you're talking to kids about, we understand that college is a pivotal time. We understand that you're introduced to a whole bunch of things. All my children are done with college and they're even their masters and stuff. And so they're all done. And so I'm the only one in my entire family who does not have a bachelor's or a master's degree. I went to a couple of years of junior college. My kids, my wife, they all have this. So I didn't even get to have those experiences. I was busy running my mouth as a pastor, and working on things in that space. But I was able to connect with the understanding of what took place. I watched my own kids go through that battle of I'm getting introduced to this ideal and this, and then you're on the campus with other kids who have other ideals that come from other places. Even though they went to a Christian university, they did not allow for kids who were unbelievers to come into the university and be a part of the university. It kind of blew my mind. I always wonder why they wanted to be there, but they were there. And so they would hear these ideals. And one of the first thing, well, one of the classes everybody has to take at this university is their Christian worldview class. Everybody has to take that at the university. And so it is interesting to me that there was this mixture of words from Christ and Christianity and things that looked like it was the value, Scott. But then for me, and this is where I know people get lost because they'll go, no, no. To me, it was political. I still believe that this whole situation was not about Charlie Kirk preaching the gospel. I personally believe this was political in nature and it had to do with all of those things. I don't believe this was a gospel issue. In fact, I know that the scripture talks to us about, that if you're persecuted, basically for my sake, Jesus says you will be. Don't think yourself better than me. I was persecuted too, right? So you're not going to be better than I am in this situation. This is a course for living that standard, preaching the gospel, being that. But when we talk about the straw man setup, when we talk about you speaking against people's color, when you call women who you don't know personally, who you've never had a conversation with, speaking of not knowing, you don't know anything about their families, you don't know the nuance of how they came up, and you use cultural terms like you're a DEI hire, you're a this, you weren't qualified, and the job you took from a white person. None of those things, Scott, are things that match uh, scripture or Christianity or kingdom language. Those aren't things that I would see Jesus do. In fact, Jesus's heart was for the marginalized, right? For the people who were on the outskirts. We see that with just three people who I mention all the time. The woman at the well is one of my favorite stories, right? He goes into her life, and the whole time he could have judged her, but he shows up as the only man out of the other men who don't need something from her but is trying to get something to her. This is God to me. This is God's heart to me. Like, hey, I know you're in this situation. So I was always confused at the prove me wrong thing because I was like, are we trying to draw people to Christ? Or is this about people's credentials as who they are and different things along those lines? And so none of those things made sense to me. The attacks on people in general, even of course the black people, being an African American man myself, but of course the black people was something that again systemically is a long term issue for me. I'm getting ready to be 56 years old, and I look over the course of my life, and I see that systemically, and the people who've come before me, and my dad who's 83, who we've had multiple conversations about this, and other people that I've conversated with. It's I wasn't clear on what Charlie Kirk's mission was. I understand if I go to Turning Point USA and I look on their website and I see what they're saying, but when you look at Turning Point USA's set up, when you look at their business setup, they are a 501c3 that is says is a political organization. And this
Yeah.
is why, again, I couldn't get on board with people who were like, no, he was for the gospel. I was like, no, this organization is set up as a political organization. I have two nonprofits, and they both have to do with Christianity. my
Right.
my my coaching and my ministry page, they're faith based. That's what they are. And so my documentation says that. And so when you see me, when you hear me, those are the kind of things that I'm going to be talking about. In fact, I try to stay away from politics, and I try to start with Jesus and say, my Christianity informs what I believe politically, but politics don't get to inform my Christianity. So I struggled with that because I saw these two things being brought up there, and I was like, if you mix this, you're always going to come out with politics. You're never going to come out with Christianity. So I was always confused, even when I just saw him in general, and he was on the
Sure.
campus here in Arizona. In fact, from what I understand, he lived here, and so he was on the campus here, and it was a whole uproar about stuff and so on and so forth. And there were people protesting and all this other kind of good stuff because again, it wasn't like he was bringing this message, in my opinion, of hope and that God loves you, God wants your heart, God's after you. Let me tell you this story about this great Messiah, this great Son of God who came. No, it was again, and maybe the shock value he thought was the thing that was necessary, but I still don't think those two things make. So I'm still not clear on what his purpose was in putting in the scripture,
Yeah.
along with what, again, an organization that says that all of its documents tell you that it's a political conservative organization. And
Yeah.
conservative,
So,
by the way, doesn't mean Christian, because you can be a
right.
conservative and not be a Christian. You just
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. In the days of Jesus, the religious elite were the conservatives, right? And Jesus was challenging their particular position.
Yes.
And so what we saw in Charlie Kirk, I think, was what we're seeing with a lot of the rhetoric on the political right in this country, and it is a conflation of what it means to be an American, their interpretation of that, with what it means, what they think it means to be a Christian. And so, I tell people all the time, and this applies to Charlie Kirk, it applies to President Trump, it applies to anyone in his cabinet. I'm not questioning the sincerity of their private faith and how they believe.
Hmm.
What I am questioning is how they present that to the rest of the world.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that you don't have to condemn sin to be an effective Christian. I think there is a way that these people, these politicians, can be condemning of what they believe the Bible teaches about sin
Yeah.
without being hateful
Yes.
about it. And the way that you do that is by exhibiting curiosity about the world, as well as humility when it comes to uh, making statements. And so we saw none of that posture of humility from Charlie Kirk, or at least I haven't seen it in what's been posted, nor do we see it from anyone in the cabinet of the presidential cabinet right now, and we certainly don't see it from President Trump. Let me just use President Trump as an example.
Okay.
Imagine, imagine how different it would be if, when President Trump was elected the first time to office or the second time, and this was actually my hope, especially during the first term. I thought, well, yeah, he's bombastic. He's out there with a lot of his statements, but when he gets into office, you can't help but look around the Oval Office. You can't help but look around at the trappings of our, the symbols of our democracy and be humbled. And I thought, well, that will happen to President Trump. He's going to get into office. He's going to realize the magnitude of the job and the authority which has been invested in him, and it's going to be humbling. I didn't see that at all. In fact, I saw the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine if when President Trump took office, he came out and he said something like, I know that I've said a lot of outrageous things, but I want the American people to know right now that I represent all of you, that I'm here to lead all of you, even those that disagree with me, even those that voted against me. I'm here to do my very best for you and for the American people. But instead, what does he say? Even at the memorial for Charlie Kirk, what does he say? He says, I hate my opponents.
Yeah.
I don't want the best for them. I can't forgive them. And this is on the heels of that emotional moment where um, Erica Kirk is saying, I forgive the person that did this to my husband.
Yeah.
Trump gets up and says, I hate everybody that disagrees with me. And then he posts ridiculous memes like the one, where he's flying the jet and dropping excrement, and so imagine if he just walked that attitude back just a little bit. I'm not saying he has to completely change who he is, but just recognize that in the office of the presidency, you have to represent all of the people. You have to show a little bit of humility, but all we see are displays of pride, displays of power and status and hatefulness in rhetoric that says, if you didn't vote for me, I'm not about to do anything to try to help you. And so that feeds into the rhetoric for that sets the stage for the rest of us and how we talk to one another. Just the other day, I saw that text exchange between Caroline
Mm-hmm.
Levitt and a reporter, and how she talked and demeaned that reporter. And my query that I posted on Facebook was, when I was teaching college, I would teach students how important it was to say things in a professional way, especially if you're in a public setting,
Yeah.
how you say things and how you comport yourself is very important to your success in that public setting. We had standards for behavior, and we especially had standards for politicians and how they talked to one another and how they
Yeah.
conducted themselves. And if you got out of lines with that as a politician, historically, you were punished by your constituents.
Yeah.
But now all of those standards seem to be thrown out the window, and people are being rewarded for how they talk to their political opponents, especially if they do so in a hateful way. And so I'm just wondering, all of those standards, are they not important anymore? And my
Right.
question was, if you say, well, yes, they are important, then my question is, well, then why are you tolerating it from the highest office in the land
Yeah.
if you're not willing to tolerate it from anybody in your personal life? We wouldn't put up with this kind of behavior, rhetoric
No.
from anybody, our
No.
pastor, our postman, our dog catcher.
No.
But because it's the president of the United States, suddenly he gets a pass.
Yeah.
And I don't understand that, and I never will.
Me either, Scott. Let me take it over from the not that you were being political, you were just talking about that, but
Sure.
let me jump into the scripture and say that at the end of the day, everyone who we know is eligible for God's love. So even if you don't carry a title, president, if you're a Christ follower, then you fall under the authority of what the Word of God says to us and what it tells us to do. And with that being said, we all then, no matter what kind of mission we want to place on our ministry or on our church, we all have the great co-mission. Remember, it's a co-mission, which says to us to go into all the world, right? And make disciples. I love this. I love that it uses this terminology of all nations. Look up the word nation biblically, and it means all people groups, all people groups. When we fail to see people that are in the imago Dei, they're made in the image of God, we are failing to respond and act in a way that God would act towards his own people, towards his own creation, towards people. And so I feel like we have, again, as you've alluded to, we've kind of taken on this now, this discourse with people now in culture because the highest office in the land says, well, as long as you do this and you're doing this, quote, in the name of righteousness, and we sprinkle in what God wants and some conservatism, then you can say whatever you want to say, how you want to say it, and the way you want to say it to other people who don't ascribe to this. But I don't see that as God's move within the scripture. I don't see that. I see God's heart towards people. I see God's compassion towards people. Even in the Old Testament, while they kept having side chicks, if you will, God keeps coming to them and keeps calling them back to himself. He keeps calling them back to himself. He's giving them chance after chance and time after time to keep returning back to him. And so I see this and I realize that that's not even a thing anymore. It's like, no, you
Yep.
need to already be here, or
Yep.
if you're not, then you're an enemy. And if you happen to say that you or I, right, then and we have a conversation like this, or we say, hey, listen, something is deeply wrong with what we see here and doesn't match what we know, then you also are put into this category of being an enemy of some sort against what other people believe is the new way to go about handling our lives using Christian terms and Christianity. And so I really struggle, Scott, with the ideal that again, people believe that we can take what the scripture says and destroy people with it when we don't see that
Yeah.
coming from the text. I was telling my class, so I have Bible study even tonight. I have my Bible study group that I teach online, and so I have new people often, and so one of the people had asked about how God deals with us and so on and so forth, and I said, listen, I know I think you're asking me, does God send people to hell? And I said, in fact, it's simply the rejection of God. God's not saying you go to hell and you go to hell and you go to hell. I was like, that's not his heart. That's not his character. So you could see this, that God keeps making this appeal to us, right? Even the scripture says that God through us is now making that appeal to unbelievers to come back to God. And so I just don't see that happening. And so on the church side of it, I see that we've taken on this ideology. I see that we've not wanted to grow and develop. There's advantage, Scott, that has taken place in the church to take on this mindset and this mentality, but it has split people. So now we have families that don't talk to each other. Certain people go to the same church, other people don't go to the same church anymore, right? You have people in the congregation who have left and are not a part of it in some way, shape, or form, or looking for new ways. People have just simply split themselves off from this, and it's challenging on so many different levels and heartbreaking. I want you to listen to something real quick here
Okay.
that I think is important to the conversation. So let's listen to this real quick. This is David Platt. He's a pastor, and this was his conversation that he had.
Sacrifice more of my preferences as a white pastor. I need to grow in my laying aside of preferences for members of this body because I want Christ to be exalted through increasing diversity in our leadership and our membership. On a related note, I do not want to speak from the Bible on issues that are popular among white followers of Christ while staying silent in the Bible on issues that are important to non-white followers of Christ. That's not faithful pastoring. I actually read this week, studies have shown that white church leaders are less likely to speak and act prophetically on race issues because white church leaders have more to lose when they do. Basically, if you want to draw a crowd in general, stay away from racial issues. If you want to draw a crowd of white people or black people or this type of person or that type of person, then stay away from saying any one of those types of people is part of the problem on racial issues. Because the reality is many people mainly want to be comforted when they come to church. And as people, we're naturally drawn to that which brings the most benefit with the least cost. So if you give people a choice between the church of comfort and the church of comfort, but you need to make sacrifices to change your life, people will choose the church of comfort most every time. Which is why we've designed so much of the church culture the way we have today. And it's why we're so prone not to talk about issues that are uncomfortable to us. And I just want to see that the Bible doesn't give us that option. Like Amos 5 doesn't give us that option. We cannot truly worship God while we stay silent on injustice in all kinds of areas. No, as a white pastor, I have blind spots. So I am part of the problem. I need friends and fellow pastors around me from different ethnicities who help me see those blind spots. And I'm committed to listening and learning and loving, laying aside whatever contemporary church growth methodology says is the best way to grow the church, i.e. ignore the issues. I want us to do the exact opposite. I want us to hear God's word clearly on these issues, and then we can trust him with the growth.
That was a profound video for me. It was
Yeah, well
powerful to
said.
hear him say that. This again is why I felt like it was important for us to expand on this conversation and what we saw again from Charlie Kirk. And I get it for the person who said, well, he's not a pastor. Correct. You would be correct. But as Christians, I don't think that God has looks at us, Scott, and says, well, Scott, Demetrius is a pastor and you're a scholar, historic history scholar, and so you guys don't you just don't have to have the same value system here because now while we may teach from different angles and come from different things along those lines, I'm open to that. But again, delivery. You made mention of delivery. You made
Mhm.
mention of being aware of what we're saying and how we're saying and who we're saying it to. That's still the bigger issue for me that I think too many people are not willing to wrestle with and see that this was problematic. It certainly was problematic for me.
Yeah, and I appreciate you playing that clip from David Platt. I have a great deal of respect for him. I hadn't heard that, and yeah, he's absolutely right. If you look at the rhetoric of Jesus and the way that he talked to people, he wasn't opposed to using strong language, and
Hmm.
at times Jesus was even provocative. But my challenge for a lot of these conflict entrepreneurs that we have today on the internet
It's a good word.
is who they are directing their rhetoric at,
Yeah.
because Jesus reserved his harshest words not for those that his society or his religious system
Mm,
condemned as sinners, but his harshest rebuke was reserved for those who thought they had it all together, the leaders of that religious movement, that religious system, who exploited the poor, who built their livelihood on the backs of people who had to pay to give the right kind of sacrifice. And so, if you break it down, what Jesus was attacking was the religious infrastructure of his day that exploited people, especially the poor, uh,
yeah.
in order to gain money.
Yeah.
And so, what David Platt is saying there is exactly right. That far, far and by large, our religious system in the United States is not based upon historical Christianity.
Mm,
It's based upon consumer driven metrics. It's about getting butts in the seat and money in the offering plate. And that's what this business model that so many church movements and churches in the United States have embraced, that's what that is perpetuating. And to a large extent, that was the model that Charlie Kirk was exploiting. So, a lot of these college campuses, they already have ministries that are in place. So it was easy for Turning Point USA to step into that and sort of exploit that to utilize contemporary Christian music. If you looked at his memorial, a lot of the people that were there were Christian celebrities or pop stars that make their livelihood off of people buying that kind of Christian music. And so the whole infrastructure is built upon uh, white normative behavior in the United States. People who subscribe to this is what a megachurch looks like. This is what a Christian leader looks like. And I appreciate David Platt pushing back against that and saying, no, we need to do the exact opposite. If we want to uh, uh, represent Jesus effectively to this culture. Famously, a few years ago, Russell Moore, who is, I believe, the editor in chief of Christianity Today, he got a lot of flack because he spoke out against what is happening in a lot of these churches with pastors who get up and they endeavor to preach the Bible, what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, and you had people from the pews coming back and saying, "What is all this woke stuff that you're talking about?" Well, it's Jesus, right? It's the message of Jesus. Turn the other cheek.
Yeah.
Love your enemies. Pray for those that persecute you. And because that's perceived now as weakness in our society, what these folks are advocating for, what Charlie Kirk was advocating for, certainly seemed to be, and certainly what President Trump and a lot of people in his cabinet are advocating for is a theocracy,
Yeah.
right? A government that
Yes.
is ruled by Christians and forces people to embrace Christian values and morals under the threat of the law if you don't. And so that is antithetical to everything
Oh my
that
gosh.
Jesus represented. He said, "My kingdom is not of this world." And
Yes.
he famously told Pilate that if you know if he told his followers to take up the sword and to revolt, then that was against everything that his father sent him to do. And
Man. Yes.
we know that at any moment Jesus could have snapped his fingers and he could have taken over that empire by force, but he didn't do that. He laid down his life, and we as Christians are called to do the same.
He
And
said it.
yeah,
He said
absolutely.
it, Scott. He
Hmm.
said, not only is my kingdom not of this world, he said, but if I wanted to,
Right.
I could call legions of angels right now. This could be a rap. This could be
Yeah.
rap. So go
Yep.
ahead. I interrupted you.
No, and and further, when Peter tried to defend Jesus with a sword when he was being arrested, he said, "Peter, put away your sword.
Yeah.
We're not going." And he healed the ear of the servant, the very one that was attacked by Peter.
He did. Yes.
This was so he demonstrated it over and over again. And so how that is suddenly the religion of this servant preacher teacher from Galilee has suddenly morphed into we're in power, we're in charge, so we're going to destroy everyone who doesn't agree with us. We're going to hate those who oppose us, and we're going to legislate our morals, and we're going to demand that everyone get in line. If you don't, we're going to throw you in prison or we're going to throw you out of the country. It's
Is
I
that
don't know
even
how
a
we
thing,
got here.
Scott? Can I interrupt you? Is that even a thing?
Absolutely, please.
Can we legislate morality?
can't. I
You
mean, you can get somebody to obey on the outside, but it's like the little kid, right? At church, his mom is telling him, sit down, and the kid's like, "Well, I'm going to sit down, but I'm standing up on the inside." Right?
right,
It's what
right,
it's what Jesus said at
right.
the Sermon on the Mount. That was
Yeah.
the point that he was making. He was like,
Yes.
"You've heard it said, you shall not murder." But
Yeah.
I say, if you've hated your brother in your heart, you've already murdered.
You already
You
committed
shall
it.
not, yeah, you shall not commit adultery. But if in your heart you're lusting after this person, you've already done it. And
Yeah.
so what Jesus was getting at was that the gospel is not about legislating morality. That's what the law did. And the law fell short, right? Because it could govern behavior, but it couldn't change the heart. It
Art.
couldn't change the motives of
Right.
the heart. And what Jesus was saying was, I've come to change the heart and not the behavior. If we change the heart, the behavior will follow and not the other way around.
One of the things that I know people get tripped up on with this whole conversation with Charlie Kirk being at the center of what we're talking about today, but then when we kind of again zoom out and we look at it historically, is again white spaces that are being predominantly white. You and I had a conversation last year or earlier this year. I forget which time it was, and in our first time that we ever connected, and we just kind of talked about some of that. But um, the white spaces, the white being the standard. This is the standard. This is what this looks like, and if it's going to be, it's got to look like this. And it's got to move like this and talk like this, walk like this, so that it feels comfortable to me. And I read a book called Lies My Teacher Told Me. Incredible book. Incredible book. In fact, since I got it, I've read it several times. I now have it on Audible, and I listen to it when I'm working out because of the stuff that has been omitted out of the country to keep certain ideals and thoughts established that only benefited people who did not have black and brown skin, right? Just it wasn't that there was no benefit for that. It was going on from redlining to poor lending practices from Bank of America to higher interest rates, different things along those lines. To the reason why I even discovered, because I would have never known. This is the reason why the freeway system was built. This is the reason why suburbs were built. This is the reason why there's certain industry and certain parts of cities because it was set up to say, we live here. No, you live here. This is where this industry is, but you will not have access to here. You can't get out here because number one, we're not giving you a loan to get out here. So these are the things that Scott, that are oversights from people that they're like, well, not anymore. They'll be like, well, man, look at you, brother. You live in the suburbs and this, that, and the other, and da, 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 so on and so forth. Scott, let me say something to you that I'm not afraid to say, and I've said it publicly. I know that there are people. I have some cool neighbors to one side of me. I have a former aeronautical guy who worked at a really high level, and on the other level, I have a former FBI guy who just retired a couple of years ago. Great neighbors. We talk, we get along, so on and so forth. They're two white guys. One's Italian, the other one, I don't know, he's German or something. But anyway, but there are people, Scott, in my neighborhood who would prefer that they didn't see my black face rolling down the street. Let's just be honest. This just is what it is, right? So we live in a place, and they certainly don't want to see me with my wife. They absolutely positively don't want to see me with my wife. It's something that they don't want to see. It is not something that is there. Can you go back a little bit and talk about why people struggle, Scott, with the spaces having to be comfortable for them as Caucasian people? I know you've written a book, you have the story about your friend, which is powerful. And again, you guys need to tap into this stuff that Scott has available to him. All this stuff will be connected to this podcast and the YouTube. I want you to share why the discomfort exists to the best of what you can explain to people, and maybe how they can take a look at it and maybe start to wrestle with it.
So my personal religious heritage of Christianity is Pentecostalism. And so I grew up in that sort of world. I grew up in a church that was a tributary off of a global Pentecostal movement. And when I began to study the beginnings of my particular religious heritage, it goes back to a man by the name of William J. Seymour, who was a black man, the son of former slaves from Louisiana. And in the early 20th century, he connected with a former Methodist preacher, a white preacher by the name of Charles Parham, who had opened up a Bible school in Houston, Texas. And it was Parham who sort of came up with this religious innovation, certainly for the time, that connected what he believed to be the initial evidence of the infilling of the Holy Spirit based upon his interpretations of the book of Acts, Acts chapter 2 in particular. He believed that it was speaking with other tongues. Charles Parham believed that this was important because, like so many at the turn of the last century, they believed it was a very prophetic time, and they believed that the coming of Jesus, the second coming of Jesus, was imminent. And so they were trying to get the gospel message out. And so Parham believed that if people could supernaturally speak in a language that they had never learned before, that this would expedite the time that it took to get to the mission field, and they could speak the
Mm.
gospel in a quick fashion. And so the point is not the theology of all of that. The point is that he showed up in Houston with this for the time, this novel teaching of speaking in other tongues. And William Seymour, who was an aspiring evangelist and preacher, who wanted to sort of be more influential in those particular circles because he genuinely believed that God had a call on his life to preach the gospel. And he heard this message, and he had to sit in the hallway because the school was segregated based upon the laws of the times. But he believed the message that Parham was preaching, and he took it to Los Angeles, and he opened, after he was initially rejected from a particular church for preaching that message. He over the course of several months, uh, he got a following, and he opened up this mission at 312 Azusa Street. It was a former livery stable, and people began to show up, and black and white, rich and poor, immigrants and citizens, they all worshiped together. And this revival exploded in 1906, April of 1906, at 312 Azusa Street, Los Angeles, California. Well, William Seymour was excited about what was going on. He wanted his old mentor, Charles Parham, to come out and sort of give his blessing to the revival. Well, when Parham finally showed up in October, I believe it was October of 1906, and the revival had been going strong 7 days a week, three services a day, nonstop, and this would continue in full throttle until 1909. But Parham shows up in October, and he condemns the revival because, not because of the theology of speaking in tongues, but because of how they were practicing it. There were white women that were laying hands on black men, and vice versa, and black women who were laying hands on white men, and they were praying for one another. They were crying together in the altar, and there was no distinguishing between black and white. Famously, Frank Bartleman, who was a journalist who was sort of covering the events at the time, said the bloodline or the color line has been washed away in the blood. That was his statement about what was happening at Azusa Street. Well, when Parham saw this, he condemned it in the worst of racial terms, using crude language. And he was put out by the constituents at Azusa Street. And so I want to make this clear. The problem wasn't the theology. The problem was white people and black people worshiping together in the way that they did at Azusa Street, with the further complication that this was led by a black pastor. And so it wasn't a white pastor that was leading an integrated revival. It was a black man that was leading an integrated revival in 1906, the height of Jim Crow. And so what bothered Parham was that these people were worshiping God together and they weren't segregated. And that proved problematic not only for Parham, but also for the people at Azusa, because they said, no, this is what the Lord is doing. This is what the Spirit is doing. And we don't accept your condemnation. In fact, they locked him out of the mission. And Parham went across town, opened up his own revival to compete with Azusa Street. But obviously it never did. Azusa Street continued to flourish until enough white folks began to appropriate the innovations that Seymour introduced and took them back to their segregated churches and kept it that way.
Mm.
And so there's this idea about the transgressive, and I'm going to use this word as a technical term, and I don't mean it in the way that it's normally used. So the erotic nature, and we're not talking about sexual, but we're talking about the close proximity of bodies worshiping together and being in close proximity. People in white bodies began to think about this in racist terms, and all of those old tropes began to assert themselves.
Yeah.
And so this space momentarily transgressed that and said, no, this is a better way. Hey, white churches. Hey, white America. We can do it this way. And Azusa proves it. But the moment that enough white people got together and pushed back against it, they began to form their own denominations. The Assemblies of God in 1914 in Hot Springs, Arkansas, came together to be an exclusively white denomination. My own United Pentecostal Church was formed when two groups got together because they were having trouble with white ministers in the South going north to be a part of an integrated conference. And also, if you had black officials in the denomination that were signing the credential cards of white ministers, they couldn't handle that. It was too much to ask.
Wow.
And so they wanted the innovations. They wanted the novelty of Seymour's speaking in tongues and Parham's theology of the Spirit, but they didn't want it in an integrated space. And I feel like that is a microcosm of what we're having in America today. We want the participation of black bodies and black thought as long as it is led and governed by white authorities and white pastors. As long as that's the model, that's okay. Notice how often you see black people participating in predominantly white churches, but you never see white people to the same extent participating in black-led churches. And there's a reason why.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Listen, you just gave me wow. So when I was on with Chris Moses a couple of months ago, this is what we were talking about. He was sharing an experience, and we were talking about the fact that a lot of times that we as Black Christians can be in white spaces, but they don't want us necessarily in places where major decisions are being made or different things along those lines. And it's important. I also noticed, too, Scott, to your point, that you can easily see where there will be I think it's easier for African American people to go to churches that are Caucasian, and there's these levels of acceptance. But there are Caucasian people have a really hard time being under black leadership.
Right.
Those are just facts. Now, my wife is very Polish, very blonde haired and blue eyed. The churches, both of the churches that we had were extremely diverse. Both of them were incredibly diverse. And the reason for that is again, because I believe that people felt welcome. They saw leadership and their first thoughts were like, I can definitely come here because the leadership looks like this. This is what the leadership looks like. And so people would come here, and it was interesting. I would have people asking me, how did you guys do that? And then I would say, well, we're kind of intentional. So my board was made up of a diverse group of people, not only diverse culturally, but men and women I had on that board, which is a problem with a lot of people too, depending on what your denomination was. You had a woman on your board? I did. She was incredible. She was a mover and shaker here in the community. She had great experience and background. She was the perfect person to have on my board to speak back into my choices and decisions as a level of accountability and direction and wisdom. She's a perfect person to do that. And she happened to be an African American woman. But for that, and I chose her not so much because she was African American, but because of her credentials, who she was, what she represented, and what she would lend to our board members, but also then my staff, my elders that I served with alongside. They were diverse, Puerto Rican, Caucasian, black, right? We had it. And so if you walked into our church, you saw it. It was there. It was present. It was present on the stage. It was present in the leadership. It was present on the website. You could see it, right? So you're like, okay, this is what this is. Now we were rejected by some people because again, on both sides, mind you, on both sides, because of the discomfort that comes with those people being in the same spaces, being able to worship. Nonetheless, God had his hand on it. It was incredibly effective, and he breathed on it many, many times for us to do lots of great work in the communities up until 2020 when I shut the last one down just before COVID. But um, you kind of really just unpacked this whole thing here about why people. And again, these are things that people want to overlook. I love that you have that historical data to be able to go back to that and talk about that with the SBC. I know how the SBC was formed. We were just talking about their president just a little bit ago, and the heat that or their former president now that he was the heat that he was under for. And again, the whole ideal of woke and different things along those lines. We have this thing of this is what this space needs to look like, and I need to be comfortable in this space. And I appreciate you, but I'm not really comfortable completely with you being in this space. I'll say this without naming the person because that's not what I'm interested in. A couple of years ago, after COVID, I was offered a church. This guy was like, man, I really believe that God still wants you to go and do this. And I'm not Southern Baptist. I'm not Reformed. I'm not Calvinist. I'm definitely a provisionist. And so um, I was offered this ministry from the pastor, but I was so vetted through the process. Now I have history in this city, like 30 years of ministry history in the city. But the way that I was treated in this process for this building and this whole thing was incredible. At one point, I actually went back to the pastor and said, I'm not sure that perhaps, you know, that maybe this isn't a God thing. I was like, all of this stuff right here, all of this, so he had to go back and just kind of have a conversation, so that it would ease up. I was strongly vetted for this opportunity, which would have been supporting and helping them and relieving them from a financial obligation. And so I was like, I didn't get it. And so I just think that a lot of people just want to overlook that, Scott. They don't want it to be an issue. And anytime it's brought up, you start to feel that tension and that
Mm.
tightness in the room. There's this instant almost, pushback from the, well, yeah, well, and I've been told, brother, I love you, brother. My thing is I'm not actually questioning whether you love me or not. That's
Right.
not really what I'm questioning. I'm questioning, do you understand historically the challenges and the struggles and the things that we still have to battle and fight and overcome? And are you going to be a part of helping us move out of this space into a space where it really reflects the heart of God in our lives, and that we all can be in the same spaces together? I found it ironic as you were telling the story about Parham and Seymour. Most people are just going to tell you about the Azusa Street revival. It was
Yeah.
awesome. God did this, man. The Lord moved, and for these 3 years, it was incredible. This was a move of God. But no one's going to tell you the story about what you did. And this is why we don't have a lot of context for things when they're brought up, right? I mean,
Yeah.
help me out. If I'm wrong, tell me.
No, you're
There's,
right.
the context isn't there to be able to have the conversations. And then it's can't we just move on from that?
Yeah.
Why, Scott? Let's take another 15 minutes if you have it. Why, Scott, is that a thought to just move on, in your opinion? What, can we just move on from that? Look at where we are. You are a elder at this church, or you greet at this church, or you sing on our worship team at this church. And hey, brother, we've seen you, we've been here, we've loved on your family, we've seen you this, that, and the third. Um, why do people just want you to just move on from it instead of having
Uh,
conversations around it? In your
I think
opinion.
that, yeah, I think the bottom line is that it makes people uncomfortable, and it also disrupts the status quo, and the status quo that we have in the United States, even though we've made a lot of progress as society, lots of things have changed, but the status quo remains white normative behavior. What do I mean by that? The culture dictates that there is a certain way to behave, there's a certain way to talk, there's a certain way to conduct yourself, and it is defined in our institutions. And this goes back to our conversations around systemic racism,
Hmm.
that yes, people can act in, whether you're black or white, rich or poor, young or old, people can exhibit behavior that is prejudiced, that is harmful to others based upon superficial or shallow observations, like color or status or socioeconomic position. All people can do that. But what makes racism unique, and systemic racism even more unique, is that it is embedded in our cultural expectations. It is the things that go without saying. And so I'll give you a prime example of this. Um, every weekend, we watch black athletes perform on our favorite sports teams, and we get excited about it. We root for them, we applaud them, etc., etc. Until one black athlete decides to do something that ruffles our feathers or makes us angry, like Colin Kaepernick did by taking a knee, right? And had nothing to do with his performance on the field, had nothing to do with what was happening on the field. As far as I know, he could still go out and perform, and he led his team to the Super Bowl. But the moment that he started doing that, all of a sudden, it didn't matter what his athletic ability was, because he had done something that by and large offended white Americans and their sensibilities. And so that moment that he did that, he was on the outs. And black people historically in America have been rewarded or punished based upon their proximity to white normative culture. And so you perform and behave in a way that entertains us and man, we're all about you. But the
Yeah.
moment you offend us or you speak in a way that challenges our preconceived notions, then we're not going to put up on with that. And that's really what happened at Azusa Street, right? Parham was all excited about Seymour being his representative to the black community on spirit baptism and speaking in tongues. But the moment that Seymour goes to Los Angeles and people start showing up, black and white, and this sort of did a disservice to the expected notions of white supremacy in America, and it turns it on its head. And white people understand this. We know that if the playing field is even, we're going to lose to black excellence most every time, and that is threatening to our sensibilities of what it means collectively to enjoy power and status as a white person. And because of how white people have treated black people in this country historically,
Yeah.
we think white people tend to think that when equality happens, that black people are going to do the same thing to us
Yes.
white folks about,
Yes.
how we've treated y'all historically. And so we conjure up all of these notions of, we put it in terms of reverse racism
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and all of that, right? Because we know in our heart of hearts how we've treated black people historically
Mm-hmm.
is evil.
Mm-hmm.
And we're afraid that all of that evil is going to come back on us.
Yeah.
And that's how we think. Now, black folks, they're not asking for that. They're not
No.
asking for
No.
supremacy. They're
No.
asking for equality. But
Period.
because we've enjoyed supremacy for so long, we interpret equality as
That's
supremacy.
supremacy.
And
So good.
that's why our institutions remain the way that they are. That's why our culture remains the way that it is.
That is so good. Wow. Wow. I let me touch on this real quick, and then I want you to close this out with this question that I have for you. Scott, while I don't speak for every black person, I'm sure there are some people that would dissent for sure. Uh, we're not looking for any supremacy.
Right.
Same starting spot,
Mm-hmm.
same access,
Mm-hmm.
same opportunity.
Right.
And so then you could take away your DEIs. You could take away your affirmative actions. If we're starting in the same places with the same
Mm-hmm.
opportunities, different things along those lines, and because we've proven that even if you don't give us the same starting points, we'll just talk Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Black Wall Street.
Right.
We built it. You
Mm-hmm.
banished it. You banished the people. You said, "Get out of
Yeah.
here. Get away from us. Don't be near us. Go away." And then we went into the middle of nowhere and built the whole city
Yeah.
with a whole economic center.
Mm-hmm.
And you came and burned it down.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where you're like, hey, like we did it away from you. It wasn't bothering you. It wasn't connected to you. It didn't interfere with you, and you still saw it, and you came, and you're like, yeah, we can't have that. We can't. So it makes me think of the Colin Kaepernicks, right? Everybody, if you
Right.
rise up in any way, shape, or form, if you say something like you said, which is sad because again, even some of the white friends that or people that I should say more of acquaintances that I had that I know that have a problem with me, they've never said it directly to my face, but their distance certainly has,
Mhm.
and I'm fine with it only because I'm like, hey, listen, I get it, but here's the assumption though too, Scott, because they will see me and my wife and they're like, well, I don't get it. Like, what's happening with you, right? Because this is who you're married to. Like, what is like what the assumption is that I've thrown away, quote, my black card. whatever
Right.
that might be to them, right? That
Right.
like, so wait a minute, you marry somebody who looks like us or whatever, whatnot. But for me personally, Scott, the way that I unpack all this is that I'm an image bearer. I believe that Adam and
Absolutely.
Eve are everybody's parents. I just believe
Hmm.
that. And if people
Yeah.
would go back and look at any kind of biblical history and look at how nations began to split off, as people began to split off throughout history, and you would see it, the beginnings of it in the book of Genesis. You would see it. I just took my whole class through it from March all the way up until just late September. We dealt with the book of Genesis, and you would see it. So with Adam and Eve being our parents, we're humans. I also believe that race is a social construct. And because it
Absolutely.
is, and the way that it's been set up, we've been able to have conversations like this that are poor conversations that really, I don't believe was ever God's intention for us to have in
Right.
this way, in shape, or form. And so, um, man, I appreciate your insights so much on this. But if you could take like the next 5 minutes or less, whatever it takes you to share it, but 5 minutes, and we'll wrap up. I'll let you get on with your day. Um, this whole thing with Charlie Kirk,
Hmm.
what should we be doing now as Christians, as citizens, right? As humans? What should we be doing now? This has happened. We know the rhetoric that's out there. We know the division that's out there. We know the things that are around it. How do we move forward, in your opinion? What kind of things can we do to start this being a place not of division, but potentially of coming together, where more powerful conversations are taking place and more people are moving in a space that allows us to genuinely see each other uh, as human beings, as people made.
Yeah. And that's a powerful and profound question. And I think the answer may be different for different people. And let me explain what I mean by that. Charlie Kirk was white. He was a white male. He looked like me. So I have a responsibility to speak to that. People who were on the receiving end of some of his more hateful rhetoric, I understand completely when they say, I don't want to have anything to do with that. You want me to engage with someone who used rhetoric that was, that was responsible for me being further traumatized or further marginalized in this systemic racism that I already have to deal with on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
So for people of color, for black people, for black women especially, I would encourage them, you don't have to engage with any of that.
Mm,
That is not your responsibility. It is the responsibility of people that look like me to dismantle and to continue to chip away at the system that we've built, at the system that we enjoy. Why? Because even though I've never owned slaves and I had nothing to do with the institution of slavery, I still benefit from the consequences of that institution,
mm,
which perpetuates systemic racism.
yeah.
The words of Charlie Kirk in a lot of instances were crafted to appeal to the fear that people who look like me have
Mm,
of what is happening in our nation. So I have a responsibility to push back on that. So in the immediate aftermath of his death, I wrote some things and I said some things.
yeah.
Again, nothing condones political violence. Nothing condones, in my mind, violence of any kind.
Yeah.
But I did speak in a nuanced way to, we need to examine some of the things that he was saying and
Yeah.
whether or not we believe that it supports the views of Christianity, historical Christianity, whether or not it supports the views of Jesus as he represented and lived his life and his example here on earth. So, depending on who you are, I think you have a different responsibility, but I would never condemn anyone who says, hey, I felt personally attacked by the words and the actions of Charlie Kirk. So, I'm not going to have anything to do with that
Yeah.
anymore. I'm not going to say anything about that. And I understand that completely.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay. I think
Yeah.
it's okay to say, you know what, I totally reject the rhetoric of that particular person, and doing so is not a is not accepting what happened to him,
Yeah.
but it is saying, he shouldn't have said those things.
Yeah.
He shouldn't have done those things. And likewise, he shouldn't have been murdered. But no one should be murdered. There are people in this country today who, because of poverty, because of systemic racism, are living in unimaginable circumstances. And it's not because they want to be there, it's because the system and the circumstances continue to force them to be there. There are single mothers, there are Black single mothers who are thinking about, where's my next meal going to come from? How am I going to care for my children? And you know what? They show up and they do it every day, and they produce outstanding individuals in spite of all of that is stacked against them.
Yeah.
And they keep doing it.
Yeah.
But the problem is, why are we asking them to live in those circumstances? Why are we voting for politicians and policies that continue to marginalize people of color and make life harder for them? When if we all come together and recognize that these institutions still embody these racist notions, we could do away with it. We could dismantle it. We
Yeah.
can legislate, better policies that would make it better for others. So again, it depends on who you are. It depends on how you were impacted by the words and the actions of Charlie Kirk. Um, but as for me, I'm going to continue to speak out. I'm going to continue to talk about these issues because I think they're so important. And I appreciate you, my friend, in doing what you do because it's so important as well.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much for the answer. I was offended, straight up, I'll say it. My obligation as a Christian, as a man, as a father, as a social leader, in the way of Christianity, of one who speaks for that and speaks to that. I felt my obligation for sure to be on platforms like this and have the conversation. So I'm grateful. I'm honored. I'm genuinely honored to have you, someone who's so insightful and thoughtful and measured, and just very truthful. Scott doesn't know this. I'm just going to say this to everybody, and we're going to wrap up. I'm grateful for him because I realize that my conversations, Scott, are limited to people. They're just limited. I know a lot of people. There's a lot of people who've even supported things that I've done over the years in ministry who were white, and I care about them. But I also know that we're now in a different space with each other. So to be able to have those conversations and talk about them and have someone uh, just with clarity and sight is really really important. And so I'm just super grateful for you, man, and for the work that you're doing, for what you're saying, for who you're impacting, your responses. I don't always comment on your responses, but I watch your responses to people sometimes who I saw one this morning, early this morning. I saw one from somebody who may mention to you. They're always, man, they're filled with so much grace. And I appreciate that, especially with the way that we've decided to treat one another around here. And so I'm just grateful for you, man. It means a lot for me to know somebody like you and to have stumbled on your TikTok, which is crazy. Met a lot of great people on TikTok,
Yeah.
and been able to connect with you like this. So thank you so much, man, for just sharing your heart and giving some insight. In this conversation, as you all would know, would be an ongoing conversation. There's so much more to it. Scott and I are going to wrap up here today. Scott wrote a new book called The God You
The God
Gave
I
Me,
was given.
The God I
Right.
Was
The God I
Given.
was given. Yeah.
Scott, where can they find this and how can they connect with you specifically?
Yeah, so you can find it most easily on Amazon if you just put into the search menu "The God I Was Given," put in my name, Scot Loyd, one T, one L. It'll come up, and there's three different formats. You could the audio, the Kindle version, and then of course the print version. But yeah, and you can connect with me on my website, scotloyd.com, and I'm on all the socials as well. But Demetrius, thank you so much for the opportunity. As always, I count you among my friends, and I look forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
Absolutely. Likewise. Appreciate you.